Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and on the PATHLESS, one of the major focuses of my collaboration with Giant Squid was on the development of the music's interactive system. Because of the game's open-world design, the majority of the focus was on this large-scale, slow-moving evolution, almost in the background of the player's experience, as opposed to a highly granularized, real-time adaptivity, although we do have a bit of that as well. So here's a rundown of, after years of experimentation, what we came up with. At the beginning of the game, the player's hunter finds herself on a small little island where the game onboards you into the basic mechanics and also introduces you to the story, the primary characters, that sort of thing. Both musically and in terms of how it's implemented, this tutorial island is pretty understated. The real fun begins once the player moves past that initial phase onto the main island itself. As you can see, the island is divided into 3 plateaus, and even though there is a little bit of basic gating between them so that you can't easily traverse from one to the next without passing through some upgrades and new skills, you can technically go anywhere you want at any time. Because of this freedom of movement, it seemed crucial that the music simultaneously track the player's overall narrative progress and physical location. To achieve this, we divided the music into 3 acts, almost like you can think of acts in a play. So rather than base it on physically where you are, the music progresses based on how much of the narrative you've completed, and we determine that simply by tracking which bosses you've defeated. So it's actually pretty simple once you boil it down. Defeating a boss will progress the music from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3, no matter which one it is or where you are on the island. So because the narrative progression is not tied to the specific location, but the bosses are, it seemed that we could kind of combine the 2 pieces of information. The way I worked this out was that there is a top-line solo instrument that I associate with each boss that forms the kind of spine of the music in whichever act you're in. So let's say that we're in the Forest Plateau, so if I've defeated no other bosses, I will hear the Act 1 music with the oud as the solo instrument. In addition to that, the only real granular, real-time adaptivity that we decided to engage in is that there is always an element to the music that we refer to as the bounding layer. All that means is simply, if the player maintains a minimum velocity for a minimum amount of time, we will add in percussion and additional instruments to liven up the mix. It's just a way of acknowledging that the player is sustaining a certain amount of energy that the music needs to reflect. This bounding material can be added pretty subtly, and depending on where you are in the musical progression, it becomes pretty overt and really heavily changes the way the music sounds. And of course, if the player stops maintaining this level of energy, we will strip away those parts so that it goes back to a more meditative and neutral state. Despite the relative simplicity of this idea, it was one of those that we experimented with the most. What made it hard to really nail the perfect balance for was that if the system is too sensitive and too easy to trigger, then the slightest movement causes the music to suggest that the player is engaged in all kinds of energy. But if it's too far the opposite, then you can be going full speed with all this excitement and exuberance before the music ever really catches on to what you're doing. Given that the game emphasizes and rewards this constant momentum, we knew we wanted the music to play a part in acknowledging that, and yet if it was too easy to activate, it was more annoying than rewarding. But back to the large scale. If the player were to move to a different plateau before defeating a boss, the music would stay within whatever act we are in musically, but shift which solo instrument becomes the focus. So if we go from the Forest Plateau to the Redwood Steppe, then Cernus's oud is replaced by the double bass that we associate with the sorrow. Likewise, if you go north into the Great Plains, the double bass associated with sorrow is replaced by the bamboo flutes that I've attached to Nimue. And this can happen even in the middle of a cue. The transition is capable of occurring mid-phrase in a hopefully very elegant and not noticeable way. And of course, it goes without saying that the added layers associated with bounding don't care where you are either. Internally within each act is a succession of cues that are designed to ebb and flow through a kind of playlist of both loops and non-loops that give variation and sort of tell the story of that act. In working with Giant Squid, We wanted to make sure that the music has a kind of narrative coherence that follows what we think is the hunter's journey. So it starts off a bit mysterious, a bit unsure of itself. She's not entirely confident why she's even on this island. And then as we progress through it, it starts to cohere and take on a bit of a confidence. The system is designed to allow for so much variation that you can play in a given area of the game without defeating one of the bosses and get no actual literal repetition, even after hours of playing. Further mitigating any concerns over repetition is the fact that there are localized events that will interrupt the music, namely the big red storms, or venturing into one of several key kind of landmark secret areas that have their own musical language and their own musical behaviors. And of course, once you complete all the obelisk puzzles and activate the boss battle, the music proceeds pretty straightforwardly, linearly, through the chase and subsequent arena battle wherein you defeat them. This music is designed to feature the solo instrument of that boss and is absolutely tied to this location since there is only one place you can fight any given boss. Once you've activated the boss battle state for a given plateau, the exploration music associated with whatever act you were in, Act 1, 2, or 3, is now permanently disabled and can never be heard again. The result of which is that once you defeat that boss, no matter where you go or what you do, you will have progressed musically to the next stage, where we kind of upgrade the stakes. The music takes on more confidence, the instrumental palette grows, etc., etc. Another one of the ideas that I was really happy with was that in a given plateau, after you've defeated the boss, the result of the spiritual cleansing is that it also eliminates the score. So what that means is that the goal of the score, in a way, is to remove the music from all the territories that you visit. Defeating the boss leaves only just the beautiful and serene sounds of birds and wind in the trees and that kind of thing. So now that our player has defeated Cernos, in this case, and moved the music into Act 2 globally, that also means that the oud associated with Cernos is removed from all of the mixes and possibilities entirely. So again, no matter what the player does, it will reflect whichever boss they are proximate to, but since one is removed, now we have one less option. As such, the player enters into the Great Plains, so we hear the Act 2 musical material, but Nimu's bamboo flute. And as with before, now that the player's off and running, we get the bounding music to energize everything. This functions exactly the same in Acts 1, 2, and 3, even though the musical material is different. Once you defeat a second boss, it will progress a final time to Act 3, and whichever instrument is the last one yet to be exposed will become the dominant sound of the music moving forward. After completing Act 3, the player will have an encounter with the Godslayer that then ushers her into Act 4, which is also the fourth plateau, and that is, because there's only one place you can go, always going to trigger bass clarinet solos that we associate with Kumo the bear. On account of there being only one boss up in this area of the map, the internal function is exactly the same as the prior. There's the same ebb and flow between non-looping cues and looping cues that playlist their way through a system to avoid repetition, even if you play for a very long time. Once the fourth plateau is completed, the player is propelled to the floating island in the sky, and there is no exploration music to be found up there. It's a reasonably short part of the game, and also because of just the wildly different nature of the environment up there, the music is used to score individual moments of the narrative, and there isn't anything broadly systemic like in the plateaus below. Taken from a wide view like this, the music implementation seems sort of simple, but it's worth pointing out that this was the result of 2 years of experimentation and iteration before we really felt like we had it. There were a lot of different things to potentially latch the music onto, whether it's real-time velocity, even things like altitude, various mechanics that came and went and are not even in the game anymore, and a whole host of others. Because it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when open-world games seem to only care about the player's geography by offering locational music, I feel really good that we ended up with a framework that balances the relevant geographic information, namely which boss you're closest to, and an overall narrative arc which is doled out at whatever pace the player goes through it. If you progress through the story quickly, the music advances quickly. If you progress slowly and explore a lot, it will unfold very slowly to allow you to do that exploration in an unobtrusive way. For those watching this who played the game, I'd be very curious to hear from you if you felt this progression going on, or if it was all a little too much behind the curtain. We try to be subtle, and yet we also do want to be felt, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for checking this out. Take care.